Oki mai anō, welcome back. In June, Justice Minister Kris Faafoi announced a review of New Zealand's 66-year-old adoption laws. More than 100,000 children were adopted in New Zealand between 1940 and 1990. Many lost their original names and never rediscovered their birth parents. We still have about 125 adoptions in New Zealand each year. Annabel Ahuriri-Driscoll is a lecturer in Māori health at Canterbury University, whose PhD investigated the concept of identity in Māori adoptees. And filmmaker Barbara Sumner wrote a memoir about adoption called Tree of Strangers. Both women were themselves also adopted. Kia ora, korua. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. Annabel, if I could start with you. You were adopted into a Pākehā family. What was that like?
Well, I was very loved, so that's an important point to make. But, you know, I think my family were ill-equipped, actually, to understand and raise me as a Māori child. And so I think that was a big struggle. I was very different from them. And, you know, they didn't have the knowledge and the understanding of how to support me in who I am as a Māori woman.
So when and how did you discover your whakapapa?
When I was 19, I was able to find my whānau, and my birth mother, you know, very quickly said to me who my father was. So that was wonderful, but it's been a long process of over, you know, 25 years of working out what that means. So I've never had that transmitted to me in a whānau context. I've had to learn from peers, from friends, actually, and then modelling that to transmit to my children. And
Barbara, you've said that you whakapapa back to nowhere. How did your adoption create that sense of abyss?
Well, all adoption completely severs you from your history. So from your grandparents, your ancestors, any siblings you might have, aunts, uncles, your health information, everything is taken from you. So you come from nowhere, so then you have to suddenly, you know, as a person growing up, you have to make yourself up from nothing. And it's never about, I feel it's not about good or bad adoption or good or bad adopters. It really is about that there is a particular group of people in this country who have no rights to the things that non-adopted people don't even think about because they take it for granted.
And you were never able to meet your birth mother. I know you don't like that term, but you were never able to meet your mother. Is that right?
No, I don't like the term birth mother because I think non-adopted people don't call their mothers birth mothers. So I'm always looking for parity. No, I wasn't. My mother, we connected with each other. She was living in Spain by that time. She got on a flight to come to New Zealand and that plane crashed. So no, we weren't able to meet, although I have, you know, half siblings that I now am in contact with.
And I mean, such a long and slow process, and I think you've described it as the last law where morality is taken into account. The adoption laws finally being reviewed for the first time since 1955. What was your reaction when you first heard that it was going to be reviewed? And I think, Barbara, also you have some insights on what your reaction was then to how it's actually being handled now.
I have to say, well, as an adoptee, you know, I've lived this all my life and I continue to live that experience. And so I have, you know, we've talked about the fact that as adoptees we're silenced. We don't really have a voice. We're not heard. And so much of our experience is dismissed, denied. So actually, this is an opportunity for us. It's not the first time, but I think for Māori adoptees, a number of us, I guess, are coming to an age where we are actually wanting to be heard. So a great opportunity in that respect.
And is it going, Barbara, as you thought it would, the review?
No. I think that there are some big issues within the review. One is that it talks all the time, you mentioned the number of children being adopted today, so it talks about the best interest of the child. But of course, there are over 90,000 adult people who were adopted as children. We're not children. The law calls us children of any age. So we are adopted children of any age. So we are infantilised, and the reviewed papers do not address that. They don't really address the historical issues. They don't address the mothers who had their children forcibly removed, which was most of them, and certainly they were set up without any form of support. So, you know, a choice of no choice to lose your child. So no, I think that the law reform at this point, it appears that there is nobody with really lived experience informing. Certainly the way the questions are structured, you would think that.
Which is pretty appalling, considering you're saying, you don't feel like you've been heard, and here is an opportunity to do it. Whāngai is a big focus of the review. Can you explain whāngai practices and how you'd like to perhaps see that incorporated into any new law?
Yeah, I mean, whāngai is talked about as a form of customary adoption, but it's the antithesis. The polar opposite of closed adoption was about maintaining and strengthening rather than severing kin relationships. Practised openly. Whāngai children knew who they were, they knew their whakapapa. So it's about integrity of the whānau unit. And I think that, the definition and understanding of what it means to be a child, a parent, is very different, and I'd like to see those sorts of concepts filter into this law reform. But I concur with Marie Dyberg's recommendations from 2001 that we need to address the legal prohibition of whāngai. So I think repealing Section 19 is important. Enabling whānau tino rangatiratanga, and including whāngai as part of the package of options that are available to them.
And you both seem to favour the kind of concept of guardianship over adoption. Can you explain the difference, Barbara?
Well, the adoption law is not welfare. We have really good welfare legislation in this country. So if adoption isn't welfare, what is it? And I've come to the conclusion that what it is property. And certainly I have judgments from various times where people have attempted to get hold of their files, have their files opened, and judges say things like adopted people are object and subject of the adoption but not party to it. So
you know that process all too well.
I do know that process all too well. And I mean, while I have some of my files because I managed to come up with a concept that they hadn't come before the courts before, I'm still being blocked with some of them. And under supposed privacy, which we know really is just code for secrecy.
Is there ever a time where, birth parents, but parents who have adopted out their children, is there ever a time where it's okay for them not to have contact and to kind of pull up that drawbridge?
Yeah, I mean, my own mother, my birth mother, did actually say for her she wouldn't have been able to have contact soon after, I'd been adopted out because it was too painful. So, but I think if there were the supports around our mothers and around adoptive families, I mean, New Zealand compared to other countries, there's just no infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so no one's really supported. And I think that with the law reform, if we're looking at maintaining adoption, I guess dealing to some of the problematic aspects, but if it is going to continue, we have to better support families to make that work. International research around openness of adoption, it says it adds another layer of complexity, and you can't just leave families out there on their own to do that.
Yeah. Australia apologised in 2013 for forced adoptions. New Zealand hasn't even had an inquiry yet, even though the 1997 Parliament did acknowledge that coercion had happened to get babies off mothers. Should New Zealand apologise, or at the very least launch an inquiry? And then beyond that, what else needs to happen in terms of some kind of reparation, if that's even possible?
Well, we need to start by acknowledging publicly that this is the history of it, that it's all forced adoption. For the child, all adoption is forced. There is no consent. There is no time where a non-consenting pre-verbal person has a say in that. You can't even have your adoption annulled as an adult. So it's the only contract that does that.
And currently we have about 125 adoptions a year in New Zealand. Thousands of families would, say they would like to offer their homes to children, offer safe homes to babies. What if better open adoption laws led to more adoptions? Would you be comfortable with that?
No, you don't need to be adopted to be loved. And a child should not have to lose their identity in order to be loved. So adoption is really, ultimately it acts as ownership. It's property law and it acts as ownership. So why can't we have forms of enduring guardianship for those children for whom family preservation has not worked? So we don't need to We just don't need to take people and sever them from everything, not just for their life, not just for their childhood, not just for their life, but for their children and their children. So, I mean, it really is. It's a lifetime sentence and beyond.
Annabel, did you want to share your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me the key question is, because I haven't sort of landed on a definite view actually, is that, you know, can we support children to be adopted without severing that birth relationship? So I guess I would like to hear more about how that might be possible, because I do think I can understand for adoptive parents the security of the permanence of and the stability for the child. And we do know that if caregivers feel supported and secure, then that can have positive benefits for the child. But I think we really need to have discussions about that. Yeah, more of that.
Yeah, we definitely need to talk more about it, and we definitely need more action faster. Thank you both so much for your time this morning. Annabel Ahuriri-Driscoll and Barbara Sumner. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.